The pandemic may be over, but for very many people that suffering continues to this day, and there is not a day that passes that I don't think about that. Secondly, I want to convey my thanks to all those who contributed to the national response, obviously to our health and care workforce, but to all of those across the public, voluntary and private sectors. And of course to the general public who did everything that was asked of them and made extraordinary sacrifices. Finally, my lady, I know that every day the government I led did our best to take the best possible decisions, but equally I know that we did not get everything right. The learning from the pandemic is of critical importance, and this public inquiry has a central role to play in ensuring that those lessons are learned. That is not to say that there was no thinking within governments around non-influenza diseases, high consequence infectious diseases. Exercise Iris, which was a Scottish Government exercise, looked at that specifically. What there wasn't, and I think this is the significant gap, is there was no set plan, which, as I say, is not the same as saying there was no thinking into how we dealt with a pandemic that had features and characteristics of flu in terms of transmissibility, but also the severity and what we came to understand in terms of the asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19. So if you look at Exercise Iris, it was looking at a MERS-SARS type incident, but not a pandemic, one that was small and very contained. Yes. So I would readily accept that there was a gap in terms of the pandemic we ultimately were dealing with. But as I say, that does not mean the plan that was in place had no utility at all.
No, and I'm not suggesting it had no utility. The plan on its face called for flexible application. It called for flexibility. It proclaimed the fact that viral respiratory pathogenic outbreaks are by their nature inherently unpredictable, and therefore that the plan should be applied to non-influenza pandemics. But there was no development of that thinking, was there, in the plan? There was no debate about what those inherently unpredictable characteristics might consist of, the differences in the transmission rate, or viral load, or severity, or incubation period. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct. That said, and I obviously I'm not a scientific clinical expert in any way, shape or form, but it may have been difficult to capture the range of possibilities that you've just alluded to there in a single plan. I think the other point I would make about the utility or otherwise of plans, had the flu plan been reviewed and turned into something that was looking at pandemics or the potential pandemics more widely, whether that plan would have served its purpose would have depended on the capabilities that lay underneath that plan. So I'm straying slightly perhaps into future modules here, but for me the questions in my mind, literally every day, are not so much did we lack a plan, but did we lack the capabilities for dealing with a pandemic of the nature of COVID-19? And obviously I'm talking there about contact tracing, testing, infrastructure in particular. It was never the case when COVID struck that we just accepted as a given that a reasonable worst-case scenario was going to unfold. It was our determination from the outset to do everything we could, and I think this is what prevention means in the pandemic context, to suppress it to the maximum. The questions I think that are really important for us all to consider very, very frankly is, could or should we have done more to suppress to the maximum COVID? But speaking on behalf of the government I led at the time, it was never the case that we simply accepted there is a level of harm that is going to be done by this virus, and we accept that. We were always, in fact, it became later on one of the points of difference between the Scottish and the UK government, the extent to which we were still seeking to suppress as opposed to live with the virus. So I don't accept that there was ever, certainly in my mind, an acceptance of a level of harm that we were willing to have unfold.